I still remember the exact moment when I realized that love, no matter how strong you think it is, can be shaken by whispers in the dark. It was a Tuesday evening in late September, and the autumn air in our small town in North Carolina carried the smell of dried leaves and wood smoke. My husband Michael sat across from me at our dining table, his eyes avoiding mine, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. His mother had just left our house 20 minutes earlier, and the silence she left behind felt heavier than her presence ever did. That silence was when everything started to crumble, though I didn't know it yet. I didn't know that the woman who had once hugged me at our wedding and called me her daughter would become the architect of my loneliest season. I didn't know that the man who promised to stand by me through sickness and health would one day look at me like I was a stranger he couldn't trust. But that Tuesday evening, something shifted in the air between us, something I couldn't name but could feel in my bones. Michael finally looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen before: doubt. Not the kind of doubt you have about what to eat for dinner or which movie to watch. This was deeper. This was the kind of doubt that makes you question if you ever really knew someone at all. And the worst part? I hadn't done anything wrong. I had simply become the target of a campaign I didn't even know was being waged against me. My name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm 32 years old, or at least I was when this story really began 3 years ago. I grew up in a Christian home in Virginia, the kind where Sunday service wasn't optional, and grace before meals was as natural as breathing. My parents taught me to be kind, to forgive, and to see the good in people. I carried those lessons into my marriage with Michael, and for the first 2 years, I thought I had found my forever. Michael was everything I had prayed for: steady, kind, hardworking, and devoted to his faith. He worked as a contractor, building homes and fixing up old houses around town. I was a kindergarten teacher at the local elementary school, and I loved my job. I loved the sound of children's laughter, the way their faces lit up when they learned something new, the crayon drawings they would give me that I'd tape to our refrigerator at home. Our life was simple but full. We went to church every Sunday, hosted small group Bible studies on Wednesday nights, and dreamed about the family we would build together. We had been trying for a baby for about a year, and every month that passed without a positive test felt like a small heartbreak. But we kept praying, kept hoping, kept believing that God's timing was perfect, even when it didn't feel that way. Michael's family lived just 10 minutes away from us. His mother, Patricia, was a widow. Michael's father had passed away from a heart attack when Michael was 19, and Patricia had never remarried. She poured all of her love, all of her energy, all of her expectations into her 3 children: Michael, his older sister Vanessa, and his younger brother David. Michael was her favorite, though she would never say it out loud. You could just tell by the way her face softened when she looked at him, the way she always made his favorite foods when we visited, the way she called him every single day. At first I thought it was sweet. I thought it showed how close they were, how much she cared. I didn't see it for what it really was: control wrapped in the language of love. When Michael and I got engaged, Patricia seemed happy. She hugged me, told me I was beautiful, said she was so grateful her son had found someone who loved the Lord. She helped me plan parts of the wedding, even offered to pay for the flowers. On our wedding day, she cried during the ceremony, and I thought those were tears of joy. Looking back now, I wonder if those tears meant something else. Maybe she was mourning the loss of her son's full attention. Maybe she was already planning how to keep him close, how to remind him that blood runs thicker than vows. The second year of marriage was darker.
Patricia began visiting more often, sometimes without calling first. She'd show up at our door with a casserole or a bag of groceries, and she let herself in with the spare key Michael had given her. I'd come home from work and find her in my kitchen, rearranging my cabinets or folding my laundry. I was just helping out, she'd say, smiling. But it didn't feel like help. It felt like an invasion. She'd also started making comments about the fact that I wasn't pregnant yet. You know, when I was your age, I already had 2 children. she'd say, stirring her tea slowly. Michael wants a big family. I hope you're doing everything you can. Those words hit me like stones. I was doing everything I could. I was praying, charting my cycle, going to doctor's appointments, crying in the bathroom every time my period came. But none of that mattered to Patricia. In her eyes, I was failing at the most important job a wife could have. And slowly, I started to see that view reflected in Michael's eyes too. He never said it directly, but I could feel him pulling away. He stopped reaching for my hand during church. He stopped kissing me goodnight. When I tried to talk to him about my day, he'd nod absently, his mind somewhere else. I felt like I was losing him, but I didn't know how to fight for something I couldn't see. Then Vanessa got involved. She started coming over with Patricia, and the two of them would sit in my living room drinking coffee and talking in low voices. When I'd walk into the room, they'd stop and smile at me, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. I'd hear my name mentioned, followed by silence. I started feeling paranoid, like I was being watched and judged in my own home. One Sunday, after church, Vanessa pulled me aside. Her face was serious, almost concerned. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something," she said. My heart started racing. "Okay, what is it?" She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in close. "I don't know how to say this, but some people have been talking about you." I felt my stomach drop. "Talking about me? What do you mean?" She sighed like she didn't want to be the one to tell me. "There are rumors going around that you've been spending time with someone, a man from your school. People have seen you talking to him in your car after work." I was stunned. The man she was talking about was Greg, a fellow teacher and a married father of 3. We sometimes chatted in the parking lot after school about lesson plans or upcoming events. That was it, nothing more. "Vanessa, that's not true," I said, my voice shaking. "Greg is a colleague. We talk about work, that's all." She raised her hands like she was trying to calm me down. "I believe you, Sarah, I do. But you know how people talk. And Mom, well, she's worried. She doesn't want Michael to get hurt." I felt sick. This wasn't about protecting Michael. This was about planting doubt. This was about making me look bad. But I didn't know how to fight it. Because how do you fight a rumor? How do you prove something didn't happen? I went home that day and told Michael everything. I told him about the conversation with Vanessa, about the ridiculous accusation, about how hurt I was that anyone would think that about me. I expected him to be angry on my behalf. I expected him to defend me. But instead, he just looked at me with that same expression I'd seen weeks earlier. Doubt. "Sarah, I'm not saying I believe it," he said carefully. "But you have to understand how it looks. You're always staying late at school, always talking about Greg and the other teachers. Maybe you're just being too friendly." I felt like the ground had been pulled out under my feet. Too friendly? "Michael, I'm a teacher. I work with people. That's my job." He rubbed his face, frustrated. "I don't want to fight about this. Just maybe be more careful, for both of our sakes." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him and make him see what was happening. But instead, I just nodded, swallowed my pain, and walked away. That night, I lay in bed next to my husband and felt more alone than I ever had in my life. And I realized something that broke my heart. Michael had already started believing them over me. The lies were taking root, and I didn't know how to pull them out. The weeks that followed that conversation felt like walking through fog. Everything looked the same on the surface, but nothing felt real anymore. I would wake up each morning, make breakfast, kiss Michael on the cheek before he left for work, and drive to the elementary school where I taught. I would smile at my students, read them stories, help them learn their letters and numbers. I would come home, make dinner, sit across from my husband at the table we had picked out together when we first got married, and pretend that everything was fine. But nothing was fine. The foundation of our marriage had developed cracks, and I could feel myself standing on unsteady ground, waiting for it to collapse completely beneath me. Michael had become distant in ways that hurt more than any argument ever could. He stopped asking about my day, he stopped telling me about his. When we sat together in the evenings, he would scroll through his phone or watch television with a blank expression, and I felt like I was sitting next to a stranger. I tried to bridge the gap between us. I would reach for his hand and he would let me hold it, but there was no warmth in his grip. I would try to start conversations about our future, about the baby we still hope to have, about the trip we had talked about taking to the mountains that fall. But his responses were short, distracted, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. And I knew where his mind was. It was with his mother, with his sister, with the poison they were dripping into his ears every single day. Patricia's visits became more frequent and more intrusive. She would show up unannounced in the middle of the day when Michael was at work, letting herself in with that spare key. I would come home and find evidence of her presence everywhere. The furniture would be rearranged. My personal items would be moved. Once, I found her going through my dresser drawers, and when I asked what she was doing, she smiled sweetly and said she was just organizing things for me because she knew how overwhelmed I must be. I wanted to take that key away from her. I wanted to tell her she wasn't welcome in my home anymore. But I knew that if I did, it would only make things worse. Michael would see it as me being cruel to his mother, as me trying to come between them. So I said nothing. I swallowed my anger, my frustration, my sense of violation, and I stayed silent. That silence was eating me alive. Patricia also began bringing things into our home, little trinkets and objects that she said were gifts or family heirlooms. There was a small wooden cross she hung above our bedroom door. There were candles she placed on the mantel that smelled like lavender and sage. There was a framed picture of Michael as a child that she insisted should be displayed in our living room. At first, I thought these were just the gestures of a mother who loved her son. But as time went on, I started noticing something strange. The candles would burn down unusually fast, even when we barely lit them. I would wake up in the middle of the night with terrible headaches that made it hard to think clearly. I started having nightmares, vivid and disturbing dreams where I was trapped in dark places, unable to find my way out. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, and Michael would be sound asleep beside me, unreachable. I mentioned the headaches to Michael one morning over breakfast. I told him I thought maybe we should get rid of some of the candles his mother had brought, that perhaps the scent was too strong and was affecting me. He looked at me like I was being ridiculous. "They're just candles, Sarah," he said, his voice edged with irritation. "Mom gave them to us because she thought we'd like them. Why do you always have to make everything about her?" I felt my chest tighten. I'm not making it about her. I'm just saying I don't feel well and I think the candles might be part of it. He stood up from the table, grabbed his keys, and headed for the door. "Maybe you should see a doctor if you're not feeling well, but don't blame my mother for every little thing that goes wrong." The door closed behind me, and I sat there alone in the kitchen, tears streaming down my face. I felt trapped, suffocated, like I was drowning and no one could see me struggling beneath the surface. That same week, Vanessa invited me to lunch. It was unexpected because she and I had never been particularly close, but I thought maybe it was an olive branch, a chance to clear the air and rebuild some trust. We met at a small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and waitresses who called you honey. Vanessa ordered a salad and I ordered a sandwich I barely touched. We made small talk for a few minutes, but I could tell she had something on her mind. Finally, she leaned forward, her expression serious, almost pitying. "Sarah, I need to be honest with you," she said quietly. "Mom and I have been really worried about you." I frowned. "Worried about me? Why?"
She glanced around the diner as if checking to see who might be listening, then continued in a hushed voice. "You haven't seemed like yourself lately. You seem tired, distant, maybe even a little unstable. And we've noticed that you and Michael have been fighting a lot." My heart started to race. "We're not fighting. We've just been going through a rough patch." Vanessa nodded slowly, like she was trying to be understanding but didn't quite believe me. "I know it's hard to admit when things aren't going well, but Mom thinks that maybe you're struggling with some things emotionally." maybe even spiritually. She's been praying for you every day." I felt anger rising in my chest. "I don't need her prayers, Vanessa. I need her to stop interfering in my marriage." Vanessa's face hardened. "That's exactly what I'm talking about, Sarah. You're being defensive. You're pushing people away who are only trying to help you. Mom has done nothing but love you and support you since the day you married Michael. And this is how you repay her?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had been nothing but respectful to Patricia, nothing but kind, nothing but patient even when she overstepped every boundary I had. And now I was being painted as the ungrateful villain. "I'm not pushing anyone away," I said, my voice shaking. "I just want to be able to live my life without feeling like I'm constantly being watched and judged." Vanessa stood up, dropping a $20 bill on the table. "I think you need to take a hard look at yourself, Sarah, because right now, you're the only one causing problems in this family." She walked out of the diner, leaving me sitting there alone, my hands trembling, my mind reeling. I realized then that this wasn't just about a meddling mother-in-law. This was a coordinated effort. Patricia and Vanessa were working together to discredit me, to make me look unstable, to turn Michael against me. And it was working. When I got home that afternoon, I found Patricia in my kitchen again. This time, she was lighting one of those candles, murmuring something under her breath. I stood in the doorway watching her, and a cold chill ran down my spine. She didn't notice me at first, and I heard fragments of what she was saying. It sounded like a prayer, but not the kind of prayer I had grown up hearing in church. It was something darker, something that made my skin crawl. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. Patricia jumped, startled, and turned to face me. For just a moment, I saw something in her eyes, something cold and calculating, before her expression softened back into that familiar sweet smile. "Oh, Sarah, you scared me," she said, laughing lightly. "I was just lighting a candle and saying a little prayer for you and Michael. I do it every day." I stepped further into the kitchen. "What kind of prayer?" She tilted her head, still smiling. "Just asking God to bless your marriage, to protect you both, to help you grow closer together." "Why? Is there something wrong with that?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that everything about this felt wrong, that I didn't want her candles or her prayers or her presence in my home. But I knew how it would sound. I knew that if I accused her of anything, she would twist my words, make me sound paranoid and irrational. So instead, I just nodded. "No, there's nothing wrong with that." She patted my arm gently as she walked past me. "Good, because I only want what's best for you, sweetheart. I hope you know that." After she left, I blew out the candle and threw it in the trash. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything that was happening. I thought about the candles, the nightmares, the headaches, the way Michael had changed. I thought about the rumors, the accusations, the way I was being isolated from my own husband. And I thought about something my grandmother had told me years ago, back when I was a teenager. She had grown up in the Deep South, in a community where people still believed in things that couldn't be explained by logic alone. She had told me stories about women who used roots and herbs and prayers to control the people around them, to bend situations to their will. She called it root work, and she said it was real, even if most people didn't want to believe it. At the time, I had thought it was just superstition, old stories from a different generation. But now, lying in the dark next to my sleeping husband, I wondered if there was more truth to those stories than I had ever wanted to admit. I wondered if Patricia's candles and prayers were more than just religious devotion. I wondered if she was doing something deliberate, something designed to push me out of Michael's life so she could have him all to herself again. That terrified me. But what terrified me more was that I didn't know who to tell. I couldn't talk to Michael because he wouldn't believe me. I couldn't talk to anyone at church because Patricia was beloved there, always volunteering, always smiling, always playing the role of the devoted Christian woman. If I accused her of using dark practices, I would be the one who looked crazy. So I stayed silent, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape, watching my marriage crumble while the woman who was supposed to be my family destroyed me from the inside out.
The isolation I felt during those months was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I had always been someone who had friends, who had a support system, who felt connected to the world around me. But slowly, quietly, that network began to disappear. It started with the friends from church. These were people I had known for years, people I had prayed with, laughed with, served alongside in various ministries. But one by one, they started pulling away. Conversations that used to be warm and easy became awkward and strained. Invitations to Bible studies stopped coming. When I would see people at Sunday service, they would smile politely but keep their distance, like I was carrying something contagious. I didn't understand what was happening until one Sunday after the service, when a woman named Carol approached me in the parking lot. Carol and I had been in the same women's group for over a year. She was kind, genuine, the type of person who always remembered your prayer requests and checked in on you during hard times. But that day, she looked uncomfortable, like she didn't want to be having the conversation she was about to have. "Sarah, can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "Of course," I said, relieved that someone was actually willing to speak to me. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I just wanted to let you know that I've been praying for you. I know things have been hard." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you, Carol. That means a lot." She hesitated, then continued. "I also wanted you to know that Patricia has been talking to some of us. She's been saying that you've been struggling with some personal issues, that you've been acting out, maybe even being unfaithful to Michael. She's asked us to pray for you, but also to keep our distance, because she thinks you might be going through a spiritual crisis." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. She said, "What?" Carol looked pained. "I didn't want to believe it, Sarah, but she was so convincing, and she seemed so worried about you. She said she's been trying to help you, but that you've been pushing her away and accusing her of terrible things. She even cried when she told us." I couldn't breathe. Patricia had weaponized our church community against me. She had painted herself as the concerned, loving mother-in-law and me as the unstable, ungrateful wife. And because she had years of goodwill built up with these people, they believed her without question. "Carol, none of that is true," I said, my voice breaking. "I haven't been unfaithful. I haven't been acting out. Patricia has been the one causing problems, not me. She's been trying to turn Michael against me." Carol's expression softened with sympathy, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She wanted to believe me, but Patricia's story was already rooted too deeply. "I really hope you're able to work through whatever you're going through," Carol said gently, "but I think it's best if I keep my distance for now. I don't want to get caught in the middle of family drama." She walked away, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot, feeling more isolated than ever. That was the moment I realized just how powerful Patricia's campaign against me had become. She wasn't just poisoning my marriage, she was destroying my entire life, my reputation, my sense of self. And the worst part was that she was doing it all while maintaining the image of a concerned, godly woman who only wanted what was best for her family. I stopped going to church after that. I couldn't bear to sit in those pews and feel the weight of judgment and suspicion pressing down on me. Michael noticed, of course, and it became another point of contention between us. "Why don't you want to go to church anymore?" he asked one Sunday morning as he was getting ready to leave. I was still in bed, exhausted from another sleepless night. "I just don't feel welcome there anymore," I said quietly. He frowned. "That doesn't make any sense. Everyone at church loves you." I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to explain what his mother had done, how she had turned our community against me. But I knew he wouldn't believe me.
He would think I was being paranoid, that I was making excuses. So I just said, "I'm tired, Michael. I need a break." He shook his head in disappointment and left without another word. That afternoon, while Michael was at church, I did something I had been avoiding for weeks. I called my mother. My parents still lived in Virginia, about 4 hours away, and I hadn't told them much about what was happening. I didn't want to worry them, and part of me was ashamed to admit that my marriage was falling apart. But that day, I couldn't hold it in anymore. When my mother answered the phone, her voice warm and familiar, I broke down completely. I told her everything. I told her about Patricia's constant interference, about the rumors, about the way Michael had stopped trusting me. I told her about the candles and the strange prayers and the nightmares I couldn't shake. I told her how alone I felt, how scared I was that I was losing my husband and I didn't know how to save him. My mother listened without interrupting, and when I finally finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah," she said softly, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What you're describing sounds like more than just family conflict."
It sounds like spiritual warfare. And if Patricia is doing what I think she's doing, you need to protect yourself. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Your grandmother used to tell me stories about women who used folk magic and manipulation to control their families, my mother said. It's not something we like to talk about in church, but that doesn't mean it's not real. And it sounds like Patricia might be using some of those old practices to try to drive you out of Michael's life. I felt a chill run through me. Hearing my mother confirm what I had been suspecting made it all the more terrifying. What do I do? I asked desperately. You need to pray, my mother said firmly. You need to cover yourself and your home in prayer every single day. And you need to get rid of anything Patricia has brought into your house. Don't let her have access to your space anymore. Change the locks if you have to. But Michael will be furious if I do that, I said. Then you need to decide what's more important, my mother said gently, your marriage or your sanity. Because if you keep letting her do this to you, there won't be anything left of you to save. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room and thought about what my mother had said. I thought about the woman I used to be, confident and joyful and full of hope. And I thought about the woman I had become, anxious and fearful and constantly on edge. I realized that I had been trying so hard to keep the peace, to be the perfect wife and daughter-in-law, that I had lost myself in the process. That evening, before Michael came home, I went through our house and collected every single item that Patricia had brought into our home. The candles, the crosses, the framed pictures, the trinkets. I put them all in a box and carried them out to the garage. Then I got down on my knees in the middle of our living room and I prayed harder than I had ever prayed in my life. I prayed for protection, for clarity, for strength. I prayed that God would open Michael's eyes to the truth. And I prayed that somehow, some way, I would find my way out of this darkness. When Michael came home that night, he noticed immediately that things were missing. "Where are all the things my mom gave us?" he asked, looking around the living room with confusion. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I put them away," I said calmly. "Why?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Because they were making me feel sick," I said, "and I need to feel safe in my own home." Michael stared at me for a long moment, and I saw anger flash across his face. "You're being ridiculous, Sarah. Those were gifts from my mother. She's going to be hurt when she finds out you threw them away." "I didn't throw them away," I said. "They're in the garage, but they're not staying in this house." We stood there facing each other, and I realized that this was the first time in months that I had stood my ground. I had spent so long trying to appease everyone, trying to be agreeable and understanding, that I had forgotten what it felt like to advocate for myself. Michael shook his head, disappointment and frustration written all over his face.
"I don't even know who you are anymore," he said quietly, before walking out of the room. Those words cut deeper than any accusation ever could, because the truth was, I didn't know who I was anymore either. I had been so beaten down, so manipulated and gaslit, that I had lost my sense of self. But in that moment, standing alone in my living room with the echo of Michael's footsteps fading down the hallway, I made a decision. I was going to fight. I was going to fight for my marriage, for my sanity, for my life. I didn't know if I would win. I didn't know if Michael would ever see the truth about his mother, but I knew that I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a prison of lies and manipulation. That night marked a turning point. It was the beginning of my battle to reclaim my life from the woman who had tried to destroy it. And though the road ahead would be long and painful, I finally felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. I felt hope.
This was no longer just about a controlling mother-in-law who couldn't let go of her son. This was something darker, something that reached into territory I had only heard about in whispered conversations and cautionary tales. Patricia was actively working against me, using methods that existed in the shadowy spaces between faith and superstition, in the places where people called upon forces they believed would bend reality to their will. That evening, I tried once more to talk to Michael about what I had found. He had come home around 8 o'clock, looking exhausted, and I had made him dinner, even though I had no appetite myself. We sat at the kitchen table, the food growing cold between us, and I gathered every ounce of courage I had left. "Michael, I need you to listen to me," I began, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "Something is happening in this house, and I need you to believe me." He looked up from his plate, his expression already guarded, already defensive. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" I took a deep breath. "I found something under our mattress today. It was a pouch filled with herbs and hair, and I know your mother put it there. I don't know when she did it, but I know it was her." Michael's jaw tightened. "You're accusing my mother of breaking into our house and hiding things?" "She has a key," I said. "She's been coming here when we're not home. You know she has. And this isn't just about being intrusive anymore. This is about her actively trying to harm me, to harm our marriage." He pushed his chair back from the table, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. "Do you hear yourself? You sound paranoid, Sarah. You sound like you're losing your mind." Those words hit me like a slap. "I'm not losing my mind. I'm trying to save our marriage from someone who wants to destroy it." Michael stood up, his hands clenched at his sides. "The only person destroying our marriage is you. You're the one who's become bitter and suspicious. You're the one who's pushed away everyone who cares about you. My mother has done nothing but try to help us, and you've twisted everything she's done into some kind of conspiracy against you." I felt tears streaming down my face, hot and angry. "She's manipulating you, Michael. Can't you see that? She's turning you against me because she can't stand that you chose me, that you built a life with me. She wants you all to herself, and she's willing to destroy me to get what she wants." He shook his head, and I saw something in his eyes that broke my heart completely. It was pity, mixed with contempt, the look you give someone you no longer respect, someone you no longer see as an equal. "I think you need help, Sarah," he said quietly. "Professional help. Because this isn't normal. The way you're acting, the things you're saying, it's not rational." Before I could respond, before I could defend myself or plead my case, he walked out of the kitchen. I heard the front door open and close, heard his truck start up and pull out of the driveway, and I was left alone in that house, surrounded by the remnants of a life I had thought was solid and safe, realizing that I was fighting a battle I might not be able to win. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every conversation, every moment, every tiny detail that had led me to this point. I thought about the woman I had been on my wedding day, standing at the altar in my white dress, looking into Michael's eyes and believing with my whole heart that we would face everything together. I
thought about the vows we had made, the promises we had spoken before God and our families, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. Those vows felt like they belonged to a different lifetime, to different people who no longer existed. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face my students, couldn't pretend to be cheerful and encouraging when I felt like I was breaking into pieces. Instead, I drove to a small prayer chapel on the outskirts of town, a place I had discovered years ago when I first moved to North Carolina. It was a simple building, just a single room with wooden pews and a cross on the wall, but it was always open, always quiet, a sanctuary for anyone who needed a place to pray without judgment or expectation. I sat in one of the pews and let myself fall apart. I cried until I had no tears left, until my body ached from the force of my grief. I cried for my marriage, for the trust that had been shattered, for the loneliness that had become my constant companion. And when the tears finally stopped, I prayed. I prayed with a desperation I had never felt before, begging God for clarity, for strength, for some kind of sign that I wasn't alone in this fight. I prayed for Michael, that his eyes would be open to the truth, that the man I had fallen in love with would remember who we were before his mother's poison had seeped into our lives. And I prayed for myself, that I would have the courage to keep going even when everything felt hopeless. As I sat there in the silence of that chapel, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a dramatic moment, not a flash of light or a booming voice from heaven. It was quieter than that, more subtle. It was the feeling of a burden being lifted, just slightly, just enough that I could breathe a little easier. It was the sense that I wasn't as alone as I thought I was, that there was something bigger than myself holding me up, even when I felt like I was drowning. When I left the chapel that afternoon, I felt different. I felt like I had shed a layer of fear, like I had found a core of strength I didn't know I possessed. I realized that I had been so focused on trying to save my marriage, on trying to make Michael see the truth, that I had forgotten to save myself. I had allowed Patricia's manipulation and Michael's doubt to define me, to make me question my own reality, to make me feel small and powerless. But I wasn't powerless.
I had a voice. I had my own truth. And whether or not anyone else believed me, I knew what was happening, and I knew I deserved better. Over the next few days, I started taking concrete steps to protect myself. I went to the bank and opened a separate savings account in my name only, transferring a portion of my paychecks into it. I gathered important documents, my birth certificate, our marriage license, financial records, and stored them in a safe deposit box. I started documenting everything that happened, writing down dates and times and details in a journal that I kept hidden in my car. I also reached out to a lawyer, just to understand my options, just to know what steps I could take if things continued to deteriorate. The lawyer, a kind woman named Margaret, who had been recommended by a friend from college, listened to my story with a serious expression. She didn't dismiss me or make me feel crazy. She simply nodded, took notes, and then looked at me with compassion. "Sarah, what you're describing is a form of emotional abuse and manipulation," she said gently. "And while I can't prove the spiritual aspect of what you believe is happening, I can tell you that you have every right to protect yourself. If your husband isn't willing to set boundaries with his mother, and if he's choosing to believe rumors and accusations over your word, then you need to seriously consider whether this marriage is healthy for you." Her words were both validating and terrifying. Part of me still hoped that Michael would wake up, that he would see what was happening and choose me, choose us. But another part of me, the part that was growing stronger each day, knew that I couldn't keep waiting for him to save me. I had to save myself. Meanwhile, Patricia's campaign against me had escalated. She had started showing up at the school where I taught, claiming she wanted to drop off lunch for me,
or just stop by to say hello. But I could see through her facade. She was checking on me, monitoring me, making sure she knew she was watching. The first time she appeared in the school parking lot, I was walking out with Greg, the colleague Vanessa had mentioned in her accusations. We were discussing plans for an upcoming field trip, completely innocent, completely professional, but Patricia was there with her phone, and I saw her take a photograph of us together. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly what she was going to do with that photo. She was going to show it to Michael, to Vanessa, to anyone who would look at it, and she was going to use it as evidence that I was being unfaithful, that all the rumors were true. That evening, sure enough, Michael confronted me with the photo. Patricia had sent it to him with a message expressing her concern, saying that she had seen me with another man and thought he should know. The photo was taken from an angle that made it look like Greg and I were standing closer than we actually were, and the fact that we were both smiling made it seem more intimate than the casual colleague conversation it had been. "Who is this?" Michael demanded, shoving his phone in my face. I looked at the photo, then at my husband, and I felt something inside me snap. Not in a way that made me fall apart, but in a way that made me realize I was done playing defense. I was done trying to prove my innocence to someone who had already decided I was guilty. "That's Greg," I said calmly. "He's a teacher at my school. We were talking about a field trip. Your mother knows that, but she took that photo and sent it to you to make it look like something it's not." Michael's face was red with anger. "How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know you're not lying to me just like you've lied about everything else?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I have never lied to you, Michael. Not once. But you've chosen to believe your mother's lies over my truth. You've chosen her manipulation over our marriage. And honestly, I'm tired of fighting for someone who won't fight for me." He stared at me, stunned by my response. I think he had expected me to cry, to beg, to plead with him to believe me, but I didn't. I simply turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with his mother's poisonous photograph and his own doubts. That night, I slept in the guest room. It was the first time in our marriage that we had slept in separate rooms, and it felt both devastating and liberating. I was drawing a line, setting a boundary, refusing to share a bed with someone who viewed me as an enemy rather than a partner.
The morning after I slept in the guest room, I woke up to find Michael already gone. There was no note, no text message, nothing to indicate where he had gone or when he would be back. The silence in the house was absolute, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes you hyper-aware of every small sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock on the wall, the distant sound of traffic outside. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, trying to decide what my next move should be. I felt like I was playing a chess game where I didn't know all the rules, where my opponent had pieces I couldn't see and moves I couldn't anticipate. But I also felt clearer than I had in months, like the fog that had been clouding my judgment was finally starting to lift. I decided to visit Pastor James, the senior pastor at our church. He had officiated our wedding, had counseled us during our premarital sessions, and had always seemed like a man of integrity and wisdom. I knew that Patricia had his ear, that she had probably already painted her version of events for him, but I also believed that he would at least hear me out, that he would give me a fair chance to share my side of the story. The church office was quiet when I arrived late that morning. The secretary, a woman named Diane who had always been friendly to me, looked uncomfortable when she saw me walk in. "Hi, Sarah," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "What can I do for you?" "I was hoping to speak with Pastor James if he has time," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Diane glanced at the closed door of the pastor's office, then back at me. "He's actually in a meeting right now, but I can see if he's available later today." I nodded. "I can wait." She looked even more uncomfortable. "It might be a while. The meeting could go on for another hour or so."
That's fine, I said, taking a seat in one of the chairs along the wall. I'll wait. Diane picked up the phone and spoke quietly into it, and a few moments later, the door to Pastor James's office opened. Patricia walked out, followed by Vanessa. They both stopped short when they saw me sitting there, and for a moment, the three of us just stared at each other. Patricia's face was composed, but I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. Vanessa looked distinctly uncomfortable, like a child who had been caught doing something wrong. "Sarah," Patricia said smoothly, recovering her composure, "what a surprise to see you here." I didn't respond. I just looked at her, letting the silence stretch between us. Pastor James appeared in the doorway, a tall man in his 60s with kind eyes and graying hair. "Sarah," he said warmly, though I detected a hint of awkwardness in his tone. "Please, come in." I stood up and walked past Patricia and Vanessa without acknowledging them. I could feel their eyes on my back as I entered the pastor's office, and I heard Patricia say something quietly to Vanessa before the door closed behind me. Pastor James gestured to a chair across from his desk, and I sat down, my hands folded in my lap. He settled into his own chair and regarded me with a mixture of concern and caution. "It's good to see you, Sarah. We've missed you at services the past couple of weeks." "I've missed being there," I honestly said, "but I haven't felt comfortable coming." He nodded slowly. "Patricia mentioned that you've been going through some difficult times. She's very concerned about you, about your well-being and your marriage." Of course she had already gotten to him. Of course she had already framed the narrative in her favor. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "Pastor James, I came here today because I need someone to hear my side of what's been happening. I know Patricia has probably told you her version, but I need you to understand the truth." He leaned forward, his expression attentive. "I'm listening, Sarah." And so I told him everything. I told him about Patricia's increasing interference in our marriage, about the constant criticism and the subtle manipulations. I told him about the rumors she had spread, about the way she had turned members of the church against me. I told him about finding the pouch under our mattress, about the strange symbols and the candles, about the way Michael had stopped trusting me because his mother had poisoned his mind against me. I told him about feeling isolated and gaslit, about being made to feel like I was crazy when I knew, deep in my soul, that what was happening to me was real and deliberate. Pastor James listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled as I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Sarah, these are very serious accusations. You're essentially saying that Patricia has been engaging in some form of spiritual manipulation, possibly even folk magic or root work, to harm you and your marriage. I know how it sounds. I know that it's not something we talk about in church, that it's not something most Christians want to acknowledge, but that doesn't mean it's not real. My grandmother warned me about these things, and I've seen the evidence with my own eyes." He sighed deeply. "I won't dismiss what you're saying, Sarah. I've been a pastor for over 30 years, and I've seen things that can't easily be explained. I know that there are spiritual forces at work in this world, both good and evil, and I know that some people do dabble in practices that are contrary to our faith." I felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone was taking me seriously. "So, you believe me?" Pastor James hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. He said, "I believe that you believe what you're telling me, but I also know Patricia. She's been a member of this church for over 20 years. She volunteers with our outreach programs. She's part of the prayer chain. She's always been a devoted Christian woman."
It's hard for me to reconcile the Patricia I know with the person you're describing. My hope crumbled. "So you don't believe me?" "I'm not saying that," he said quickly. "What I'm saying is that these situations are complicated. Family dynamics can be difficult, especially between wives and mothers-in-law. Sometimes what feels like deliberate manipulation might actually be miscommunication or differing expectations." I felt anger rising in my chest. "This isn't miscommunication, Pastor James. This is systematic, deliberate, and it's destroying my marriage. And the worst part,
is that Michael believes her over me. He thinks I'm the problem, that I'm the one who's unstable and paranoid, when all I've ever done is try to be a good wife and a good daughter-in-law. Pastor James looked genuinely pained. Have you and Michael considered marriage counseling? Perhaps if you both sat down with a neutral third party, you could work through some of these issues. Michael won't go to counseling, I said flatly. He doesn't think there's anything wrong with him or his mother. He thinks I'm the only one who needs to change. The pastor was quiet for another moment, then he said something that made my blood run cold. Patricia mentioned that she's worried about your mental health, Sarah. She said you've been having mood swings, that you've been acting erratically, that you've made unfounded accusations against her and other family members. She even suggested that you might benefit from seeing a therapist or possibly getting evaluated by a professional. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Patricia had preemptively struck, painting me as mentally unstable so that anything I said would be dismissed as the ramblings of someone who wasn't in their right mind. It was a masterful move, cruel and calculating, and it was working. I'm not mentally unstable, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. I'm being systematically abused and gaslit, and everyone is choosing to believe the abuser because she's charming and has a good reputation. But that doesn't make what she's doing to me any less real. Pastor James reached across the desk and placed his hand over mine. Sarah, I hear your pain, and I'm not dismissing it. What I'm asking is that you consider getting some support for yourself, whether that's through counseling or through prayer or through taking some time to focus on your own spiritual health. And I'm also asking that you give me permission to speak with Michael, to see if I can help facilitate a conversation between the two of you. I pulled my hand away. Go ahead and talk to Michael, but I'm telling you right now that it won't change anything. He's already made his choice and it's not me. I stood up to leave and Pastor James stood as well. Sarah, please don't give up on your marriage, he said earnestly. I know things seem dark right now, but with God, all things are possible. Keep praying, keep believing, and trust that the truth will come to light. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that prayer and faith would be enough to fix what had been broken, but as I walked out of his office and back through the church lobby, passing the bulletin board with photos of smiling congregants at various events, passing the sanctuary where I had stood and married Michael with such hope and joy, I felt a deep, aching certainty that some things, once broken, could not be mended simply by wishing them whole. When I got home that afternoon, I found Michael's truck in the driveway. My heart began to race as I walked into the house, not knowing what to expect. He was sitting in the living room, and when he looked up at me, I saw that his eyes were red, like he had been crying. "We need to talk," he said quietly. I set my purse down and sat in the chair across from him, my body tense, my mind preparing for whatever blow was about to come. "Okay," I said. Michael took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly together. "I talked to my mom this morning. She told me that she ran into you at the church, that you had a meeting with Pastor James." I nodded. "I did. She also told me what you said about her, about all the accusations you've been making." His voice was strained, like he was struggling to control his emotions. "Sarah, I don't understand why you hate my mother so much. What has she ever done to you, except try to be a part of our lives?" I felt something break inside me, the last fragile hope that Michael would ever see the truth. "She's tried to destroy me, Michael. She's manipulated you, spread lies about me, turned everyone against me, and she's done it all while pretending to be charming and has a good reputation. But that doesn't make what she's doing to me any less real." Michael's face hardened. "My mother is not the problem. You are. You've become bitter and paranoid, and you're tearing this family apart with your accusations and your suspicions. I've tried to be patient. I've tried to understand, but I can't keep doing this." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "So, what are you saying?" He looked at me, and I saw something final in his expression, something that told me we had crossed a line we could never uncross. "I'm saying that I think we need some time apart. I think you should move out for a while, get yourself together, figure out what you really want." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You're kicking me out of our home?" He said, "I'm not kicking you out," though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just saying that we can't keep living like this. We're making each other miserable and something has to change." I stood up, my legs shaking. "If I leave, Michael, I'm not coming back. You understand that, right? If you choose your mother over me, if you force me out of this house, our marriage is over." He didn't respond. He just looked at me with those tired, defeated eyes, and I realized that he had already made his choice. He had made it weeks ago, maybe even months ago, and everything since then had just been a slow march to this inevitable moment. "Fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll go pack my things." I walked up the stairs to our bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. I pulled out a suitcase from the closet and began filling it with clothes, with toiletries, with the few personal items that felt truly mine. As I packed, I looked around at the room Michael and I had shared, at the bed where we had slept side by side, at the dresser where I had gotten ready each morning, and I felt like I was saying goodbye to a life I had thought would last forever. When I came back downstairs with my suitcase, Michael was still sitting in the living room, staring at the floor. "I'll be staying with my parents for a while. If you need to reach me, you can call." He nodded without looking up. "Okay." I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back to him one last time. "I love you, Michael. I've loved you from the moment I met you, and everything I've done, everything I've said, has been because I wanted to save our marriage, but I can't save it alone, and I won't keep destroying myself trying." He still didn't look at me, and I realized that there was nothing left to say. I walked out of the house that I had called home for 3 years, got into my car, and drove away, watching in the rearview mirror as the life I had built grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely.
The 4-hour drive to my parents' house in Virginia felt like traveling through a fog of grief and numbness. I had called my mother from the road, my voice breaking as I told her I was coming home, and she had simply said, "We'll be waiting for you, sweetheart. Drive safely." I drove through the late afternoon sun that filtered through the trees lining the highway, watching as North Carolina gradually gave way to Virginia, as the landscape shifted from the town where I had built my adult life to the rolling hills and familiar roads of my childhood. Every mile I put between myself and that house felt like both a relief and a loss, like I was simultaneously escaping from a prison and abandoning everything I had worked so hard to build. My mind kept replaying the look on Michael's face when I told him I was leaving, that blank, defeated expression that showed he had already emotionally disconnected from me, from us, from everything we had promised each other on our wedding day. I thought about all the moments that had led to this point, all the small compromises I had made, all the times I had swallowed my hurt and tried to be understanding, all the ways I had bent and stretched and twisted myself trying to fit into the shape of the wife Michael and his mother wanted me to be. And I realized that in doing so, I had lost sight of who I actually was, what I actually needed, what I actually deserved. The sky was beginning to darken when I finally pulled into my parents' driveway. The house looked exactly as it always had, a 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters, a front porch with rocking chairs, and flower boxes my mother faithfully planted each spring. This was the house where I had grown up, where I had learned to ride a bike and had my first kiss and cried over failed tests and broken teenage hearts. This was the house where I had gotten ready for my wedding, where my father had told me I looked beautiful and my mother had cried happy tears as she fixed my veil. Coming back here now, broken and defeated and unsure of my future, felt like both a homecoming and an admission of failure. My parents were waiting at the door before I even got out of the car. My mother, Janet, was a small woman with graying brown hair and warm brown eyes that always seemed to see straight through to your soul. My father, Robert, was tall and broad-shouldered, a man of few words but deep feeling, the kind of father who showed his love through actions rather than lengthy conversations. They both came down the porch steps as I opened my car door, and the moment I saw them, the tears I had been holding back for the entire drive finally came flooding out.
My mother wrapped her arms around me and held me tight while I sobbed into her shoulder, and my father stood behind her with his hand on my back, offering the silent strength that had anchored me throughout my entire life. "It's okay, baby girl," my mother whispered, using the nickname she had called me since I was small. "You're home now. You're safe. We've got you." They didn't ask questions right away. My father took my suitcase from the car, while my mother guided me inside to the kitchen, the heart of our home, where she had solved countless problems over cups of tea and homemade cookies. The kitchen smelled like pot roast and fresh bread, and I realized my mother must have been cooking all afternoon, preparing comfort food for her hurting daughter. She sat me down at the old wooden table that had been in our family for generations and placed a mug of hot tea in front of me, the steam rising in gentle curls. My father joined us, sitting across from me with his hands wrapped around his own mug, and they both waited patiently for me to gather myself enough to speak. When I finally found my voice, I told them everything that had happened since the last time we had talked. I told them about Michael asking me to leave, about the meeting with Pastor James, about Patricia's preemptive strike to paint me as mentally unstable. I told them about feeling like I was fighting a ghost, an enemy I couldn't see or touch, but whose effects were devastating and real. I told them about the loneliness, the isolation, the way everyone I had trusted had slowly turned away from me until I felt like I was standing alone in the dark. My mother listened with tears streaming down her face, and my father's expression grew harder and more troubled with each detail I shared. When I finished, there was a long silence in the kitchen, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of wind chimes on the back porch. "That woman is evil," my father said finally, his voice low and angry. "And I'm ashamed of Michael for not standing by you, for choosing his mother's manipulation over his wife's truth. You deserved better than that, Sarah. You deserve so much better." My mother reached across the table and took my hand. "Your father is right. What Patricia has done is cruel and calculated, and what Michael has allowed to happen is a betrayal of his marriage vows. But I want you to understand something very important, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. You didn't cause this. You didn't deserve this. And you are not the one who failed." Her words broke open something inside me, some dam that had been holding back months of self-blame and doubt. But what if I could have done something differently? What if I had been a better wife, a better daughter-in-law? What if I had tried harder to make Patricia like me, to make Michael see how much I loved him? My father leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Sarah, listen to me. There is nothing you could have done differently that would have changed the outcome. Patricia didn't want a daughter-in-law. She wanted to keep her son under her control. And no amount of trying, no amount of bending yourself into knots would have ever been enough for her. You could have been perfect in every way, and she still would have found reasons to tear you down, because this was never about you. It was about her own need for power and control." My mother nodded in agreement. And as for Michael, a real man, a godly man, would have protected his wife from this kind of treatment. He would have set boundaries with his mother. He would have believed you when you came to him with concerns. The fact that he didn't do those things says everything about his character and nothing about yours. Their words were like a balm on wounds that had been raw and infected for so long. For months, I had been made to feel like I was the problem, like I was the one who needed to change, like everything wrong in my marriage was somehow my fault. But sitting there in my parents' kitchen, surrounded by unconditional love and unwavering support, I began to see the situation with new clarity. I had been the victim of a deliberate campaign to destroy my sense of self, to make me doubt my own reality, to isolate me from support and push me out of Michael's life. And I had survived it. Battered and broken, yes, but still standing, still breathing, still capable of recognizing truth from lies. Over the next few days, I slowly began to put myself back together. My mother made sure I ate regular meals, even when I had no appetite. My father took me on long walks around the property, through the woods where I used to play as a child, past the creek where I used to catch tadpoles in the summer. We didn't always talk during these walks, but his steady presence beside me was a reminder that I wasn't alone, that I had people who loved me unconditionally, who would stand by me no matter what. I also started attending a small church in town that my parents had been going to for years, a different congregation from the one Michael and I had belonged to. The people there didn't know my story, didn't have preconceived notions about who I was or what I had done. They simply welcomed me with open arms, invited me to Bible study, and prayed for me without judgment. There was a woman there named Ruth, probably in her late 50s, who had lived through her own difficult divorce many years earlier. She took me under her wing without me even having to ask, inviting me for coffee and listening to my story with the kind of understanding that only comes from having walked a similar path. The hardest part, Ruth told me one afternoon as we sat in a coffee shop in town, is learning to trust yourself again after someone has spent so long making you doubt your own mind. They call it gaslighting now, but back when I went through it, we didn't have a name for it. We just knew that we felt crazy, that we felt like we were losing our grip on reality, and that nobody believed us when we tried to explain what was happening. I nodded, grateful to finally be talking to someone who truly understood. That's exactly how I feel. Like I know what happened to me was real, but because I can't prove it in a way that satisfies everyone else, I start to question whether I really experienced what I think I experienced. Ruth reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You did experience it, Sarah. Your reality is valid. Your feelings are valid. And you don't need anyone else's permission or validation to know your own truth. The people who matter, the people who truly love you, they believe you. And as for the rest of them, they're not your concern anymore. Her words helped me understand something crucial about the process of healing. I couldn't control what Michael believed, what Patricia told people, what the church community thought about me. All I could control was my own response, my own healing, my own decision to move forward with integrity and truth regardless of how others perceived me. It was a lesson in letting go, in releasing the desperate need for external validation and learning to trust my own inner compass. Meanwhile, Michael had been trying to contact me. He sent text messages asking where I was, whether I was okay, when I was coming back. The messages weren't apologetic or reflective. They were more like check-ins from someone going through the motions of concern without any real depth of feeling behind them. I didn't respond to most of them. I wasn't ready to talk to him, wasn't ready to open myself up to more hurt and disappointment. But after about a week and a half at my parents' house, he called late one evening, and something in me decided to answer. "Sarah," he said when I picked up, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, "we need to talk about what happens next." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Okay, I'm listening." There was a long pause, and I could hear him struggling to find the words. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, about the things you said before you left, and I talked to Pastor James. He suggested we try marriage counseling, that we give this one more real chance before we make any permanent decisions." I felt a flicker of something, not quite hope, but maybe curiosity. "Are you saying you actually want to try to work on our marriage?" Another pause. "I'm saying I don't want to give up without at least trying. But Sarah, you have to be willing to work on things too. You have to be willing to let go of this animosity toward my mother and try to see things from a different perspective." And just like that, the flicker died. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was about me needing to change my attitude, about me needing to be more accepting of Patricia's behavior. He still couldn't see, or wouldn't see, the real problem. "Michael," I said slowly, "I'm willing to go to counseling, but I need you to understand something. I'm not the one who needs to let go of animosity. Your mother has actively worked to destroy our marriage, and you've let her do it. If we're going to have any chance of saving this, you need to be willing to see that truth and set real boundaries with her. Can you do that?" silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he said, "I don't know if I can see my mother the way you see her, Sarah. She's my mom. She's been there for me my whole life. I can't just turn my back on her because you two don't get along." His words confirmed what I had already known deep down. Michael was never going to choose me over Patricia. He was never going to be able to see her clearly enough to protect our marriage from her interference. And no amount of counseling or trying or hoping was going to change that fundamental reality. "Then I don't think counseling is going to help us," I said quietly, "because we can't fix a marriage when one person refuses to acknowledge the real problems." Michael's voice became defensive. "So that's it? You're just giving up? You're not even willing to try?" I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and righteous. "I have been trying, Michael. I have been trying for months. I have been begging you to see what was happening, to believe me, to stand by me. And you chose your mother every single time. So don't you dare accuse me of not trying when you're the one who pushed me out of our home and our marriage." He was quiet for a moment, then said something that revealed just how deep Patricia's poison had gone. "My mom said you'd react this way. She said you'd refuse counseling and try to make this all my fault. She said you're not interested in actually saving our marriage, that you're just looking for a way out so you can be with whoever you've been seeing behind my back." I felt like I had been slapped. Even now, even after everything, he was still listening to his mother's lies, still giving her words more weight than mine. "I have never been unfaithful to you," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "Not once. Not ever. But the fact that you would even repeat that accusation tells me everything I need to know about where we stand. You've already convicted me in your mind, Michael. You've already decided I'm the villain in this story. So there's nothing left for us to talk about." Before he could respond, I hung up the phone. My hands were trembling, my heart was racing, and I felt tears streaming down my face. But underneath the hurt and anger, I also felt something else, something unexpected. I felt relief. I felt the relief of finally accepting that my marriage was over, that there was no saving something that had been so thoroughly poisoned, that the healthiest choice I could make was to let it go and move forward with my life.
My mother found me sitting on the edge of my bed a few minutes later, the phone still clutched in my hand, tears drying on my cheeks. She sat down beside me and wrapped her arm around my shoulders, and we sat there in silence for a long while before I finally spoke. "It's really over, Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "My marriage is really over." She pulled me closer. "I know, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." I leaned my head against her shoulder, feeling like a child again, small and hurt and needing comfort. "I tried so hard. I loved him so much. How did it all go so wrong?" My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. "Sometimes, Sarah, love isn't enough. Sometimes two people can love each other, but still not be able to make a marriage work because of circumstances or interference or fundamental incompatibilities. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to recognize when a relationship has become toxic and have the courage to walk away from it, even when it breaks your heart to do so." Her words made sense on a level I hadn't been able to access before. I had been raised to believe that marriage was forever, that divorce was a failure, that giving up on a relationship meant you hadn't tried hard enough, or prayed hard enough, or loved hard enough. But sitting there with my mother, I began to understand that sometimes staying in a destructive relationship is actually the greater failure, the greater sin against yourself and your own well-being.
sometimes walking away is the bravest, most faithful thing you can do. Over the following weeks, I began the painful process of moving forward with my life. I contacted Margaret, the lawyer I had consulted earlier, and began filing for divorce. The legal process was complicated and emotionally draining, filled with paperwork and court dates and negotiations over property and assets. Michael contested some aspects of the divorce, particularly when it came to dividing our belongings and our small amount of savings. His lawyer painted me as the unreasonable party, the wife who had abandoned her marriage without cause, and I had to sit in mediation sessions and listen to lies being told about me while maintaining my composure and dignity. But I had my own lawyer, and I had documentation of everything I had experienced, the journal I had kept, the photographs of strange items I had found in our home, text messages and emails that showed the pattern of manipulation and gaslighting. It wasn't enough to prove everything I knew to be true, but it was enough to establish that our marriage had been troubled, that there were legitimate reasons for the dissolution, that I wasn't just a flighty wife who had given up at the first sign of difficulty. During this time, I also started seeing a therapist named Dr. Patricia Chen, a woman who specialized in helping people recover from emotionally abusive relationships and family systems dysfunction. I had been hesitant at first to seek therapy, worried that it would somehow validate the accusations that I was mentally unstable, but Dr. Chen helped me understand that seeking help was actually a sign of strength, not weakness, that taking care of my mental health was essential to my healing and recovery. In our sessions, Dr. Chen helped me understand the dynamics that had been at play in my marriage and my relationship with Patricia. She explained concepts like enmeshment, where a parent has an unhealthy emotional dependence on their adult child, and triangulation, where a third party is brought into a conflict between two people to deflect and manipulate. She helped me see that Patricia's behavior fit patterns of covert narcissism and emotional manipulation, and that Michael's inability to set boundaries with his mother was a result of years of conditioning and guilt that had started long before I entered the picture. Understanding these dynamics didn't erase the pain I had experienced, but it did help me make sense of it, helped me see that I hadn't been crazy or overly sensitive or failing as a wife. I had been caught in a toxic family system that was designed to keep outsiders at bay and maintain Patricia's control over her son. And no amount of trying harder or being better would have ever been enough to overcome that system, because the system itself was fundamentally broken. Dr. Chen also helped me work through the spiritual aspects of what I had experienced. She didn't dismiss my concerns about the candles and the pouches and the strange rituals I had witnessed. Instead, she acknowledged that many cultures and communities have traditions of folk magic and spiritual manipulation, and that these practices, whether or not they have actual supernatural power, can have very real psychological effects on the people targeted by them.
The fear and anxiety I had felt, the nightmares and headaches, could have been the result of stress and gaslighting, or they could have been influenced by something more. But either way, they were valid experiences that deserved to be addressed and healed. One afternoon, about 2 months after I left North Carolina, Dr. Chen asked me a question that shifted something fundamental in my perspective. "Sarah, I want you to imagine yourself 5 years from now," she said, leaning forward in her chair. "Imagine that you've healed from this experience, that you've built a new life for yourself. What does that life look like? What are you doing? How do you feel?" I closed my eyes and tried to picture it. At first, all I could see was darkness. All I could feel was the weight of loss and failure. But slowly, an image began to form. I saw myself in a small house, maybe back here in Virginia, or maybe somewhere new entirely. I saw myself still teaching, still working with children who needed someone to believe in them. I saw myself surrounded by friends who truly knew me and loved me, not the carefully curated version of myself I had tried to present to Michael's family.
I saw myself at peace, sleeping through the night without nightmares, waking up without dread, living without constantly looking over my shoulder. I saw myself whole again, healed, maybe even happy. When I opened my eyes, there were tears on my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of realizing that the life I had just imagined was possible, that it was something I could actually work toward and achieve. I see myself free, I told Dr. Chen. I see myself living without fear, without constantly trying to prove myself or defend myself. I see myself surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not who they want me to be. She smiled, a warm and genuine smile. Then that's what we're working toward. That's the goal. Not to fix what was broken in your marriage, because some things can't and shouldn't be fixed, but to help you reclaim yourself, to help you build the life you just described. Her words gave me something I desperately needed, a sense of direction, a path forward, a reason to keep putting one foot in front of the other even when the journey felt impossible. I threw myself into the work of healing with the same determination I had once poured into trying to save my marriage. I attended therapy sessions religiously, did the homework Dr. Chen assigned, practiced the coping strategies and boundary setting techniques she taught me. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during my marriage, people who had known me before Michael, before Patricia, before everything had gone wrong. I started exercising again, taking long runs through the Virginia countryside that left me physically exhausted but mentally clear. I volunteered at my parents' church, helping with the children's program, finding purpose and joy in making a difference in young lives. And slowly, gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, I began to feel like myself again. The nightmares became less frequent, the headaches faded. The constant anxiety that had been my companion for so long started to loosen its grip. I found that I could go hours, sometimes whole days, without thinking about Michael or Patricia or everything I had lost. I found that I could laugh again, genuinely and freely, without the laughter feeling forced or hollow. I found that I could look in the mirror and recognize the woman looking back at me, could see strength and resilience in her eyes instead of fear and defeat. By the time spring arrived, nearly 6 months after I had left North Carolina, the divorce was finalized. I received the papers in the mail on a Tuesday morning, official documents with stamps and signatures that declared my marriage to Michael Whitmore legally dissolved. I sat at my parents' kitchen table, the same table where I had broken down and confessed everything months earlier, and I read through the papers with a strange mixture of sadness and relief. It was over. The chapter of my life that had begun with such hope and joy and promise had officially ended. But endings, I was learning, could also be beginnings. That same week, I received a job offer from an elementary school here in Virginia, not far from my parents' home. I had applied somewhat heartedly, not sure if I was ready to return to work, not sure if I was ready to face classrooms full of children who would need me to be strong and present when I still felt so fragile. But the principal who interviewed me had seen something in me, some spark of passion for teaching that had survived everything I had been through, and she had offered me a position starting in the fall. I accepted the job, and with it, I accepted the invitation to truly begin again, to build a life that was wholly mine, untainted by manipulation or control or anyone else's expectations. I found a small apartment in town, a cozy one-bedroom place with hardwood floors and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. My parents helped me move in, bringing furniture from their attic and helping me paint the walls cheerful colors that made the space feel warm and welcoming. For the first time in years, I was living alone, answering to no one but myself, making decisions solely based on what I wanted and needed without having to consider how it might affect anyone else or what anyone else might think. The independence was both exhilarating and terrifying, but mostly it felt like freedom.
As the seasons changed and summer gave way to fall, I found myself standing in front of my new classroom at Riverside Elementary School, looking at the rows of small desks and colorful bulletin boards that I had spent the past week preparing.
The walls were decorated with alphabet charts and number lines, with a reading corner filled with pillows and books, with a calendar area where we would talk about the days and months and weather. Everything was ready for the students who would arrive in just a few days. 22 kindergartners who would become my responsibility, my purpose, my reason for getting up each morning and putting aside my own struggles to be present for someone else. Standing there in that classroom, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet recognition that I had survived the worst period of my life and emerged on the other side changed but not destroyed. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, the woman who had sat across from Michael at their dining table and watched doubt cloud his eyes for the first time. That woman had been so desperate to be believed, so frantic to prove her worth, so terrified of losing the life she had worked so hard to build. But the woman standing in this classroom now understood something that the earlier version of herself had not yet learned. She understood that her worth was not determined by whether other people believed her or valued her or chose her. Her worth was inherent, God-given, unchangeable, regardless of how others treated her or what lies they told about her. She understood that sometimes the people you love most will fail you, will choose their own comfort over your well-being, will believe convenient lies rather than uncomfortable truths. And she understood that surviving that kind of betrayal required a strength she hadn't known she possessed until she was forced to discover it. The first day of school arrived with the nervous energy that always accompanies new beginnings. Parents dropped off their children with instructions and concerns and hopeful smiles. And I greeted each family with warmth and reassurance, channeling all of my training and experience into creating a safe and welcoming environment for these young learners. The children were exactly what I needed, with their innocent questions and boundless enthusiasm and complete lack of judgment about my past. They didn't know that I was divorced, didn't know about the painful journey that had brought me to their classroom, didn't care about anything except whether I would be kind and whether learning would be fun and whether they would make friends. In their presence, I could simply be Miss Sarah, the teacher who read stories with funny voices and celebrated every small victory and dried tears when someone felt sad or scared. Teaching became my therapy in ways that even Dr. Chen's sessions couldn't fully address. Every day spent with those children reminded me of why I had chosen this profession in the first place. Reminded me that there was goodness and hope in the world, even when my personal experience had been filled with darkness and betrayal. I watched shy children gradually come out of their shells, watched struggling learners suddenly grasp concepts they had found impossible just days before, watched friendships form between unlikely pairs who discovered they both loved dinosaurs or drawing or playing pretend. These small miracles reminded me that growth and change and healing were always possible, that damage didn't have to be permanent, that with patience and support and unconditional positive regard, people could overcome difficult starts and blossom into their best selves. I applied these same principles to my own healing journey, treating myself with the same patience and encouragement I offered my students. Around October, about 8 months after I had left North Carolina, I received an unexpected phone call from Vanessa, Michael's sister. I almost didn't answer when I saw her name on my phone screen. Couldn't imagine what she might want to say to me after all this time and after everything that had happened. But curiosity got the better of me and I accepted the call, my heart beating faster as I prepared for whatever attack or manipulation might be coming. But when Vanessa spoke, her voice wasn't hostile or accusatory. Instead, she sounded hesitant, almost ashamed, like someone who was struggling to find the courage to say something difficult. She asked if we could meet somewhere to talk, said there were things she needed to tell me, things she needed to get off her conscience. I was suspicious at first. wondering if this was another trap, another way for Patricia to gather information about me or hurt me further. But something in Vanessa's tone made me agree to meet her halfway between our two locations, at a coffee shop in a small town neither of us had any connection to. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon 2 weeks later, giving me plenty of time to prepare myself emotionally and to talk through the situation with Dr. Chen, who helped me set clear boundaries about what I was and wasn't willing to discuss or tolerate. When I walked into that coffee shop and saw Vanessa sitting at a corner table, I was struck by how different she looked from the last time I had seen her. She had lost weight, her face was drawn and tired, and there was something in her eyes that looked like guilt and regret. She stood when she saw me, and for a moment we just looked at each other across that small space, two women who had once been family, now standing on opposite sides of a chasm created by lies and manipulation.
I sat down across from her, ordered a cup of tea I didn't particularly want, and waited for her to speak. Vanessa twisted her hands together nervously, seeming to struggle with where to begin, and finally she just started talking, the words tumbling out like she had been holding them in for too long and couldn't contain them anymore. She told me that she had been thinking about me constantly since the divorce was finalized, that she had been having nightmares and anxiety attacks, that she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been part of something terrible and wrong. She told me that in the months since I had left, she had started seeing Patricia's behavior with new eyes, started recognizing patterns of manipulation and control that she had previously dismissed or overlooked because they were directed at someone else rather than at her. She told me that Patricia had started targeting her more intensely after I was gone, criticizing her parenting and her marriage and her choices, using the same tactics she had used on me to make Vanessa doubt herself and feel inadequate. And experiencing that treatment firsthand had made Vanessa realize, with horrifying clarity, exactly what I had been going through, exactly how deliberate and cruel Patricia's campaign against me had been. Vanessa's voice broke as she told me this, tears streaming down her face as she apologized over and over for not believing me, for participating in spreading rumors about me, for helping Patricia isolate me and turn people against me. She said she had been blind, had been so conditioned to accept her mother's version of reality that she hadn't been able to see the truth even when it was right in front of her. She said she was ashamed of her role and what had happened to me, ashamed that she had chosen loyalty to her mother over basic human decency and fairness. And then she told me something that made my blood run cold and validated everything I had suspected and feared. She told me that she had found evidence of the folk magic practices I had accused Patricia of using, that she had discovered books and materials hidden in Patricia's home that detailed rituals and spells designed to break apart relationships and cause confusion and discord. She told me that Patricia had been practicing these things for years, that she had used similar methods to drive away David's first serious girlfriend when he was younger, that their father had suspected but had never been able to prove that Patricia had done something to make his health deteriorate in the months before his death. Vanessa said she didn't know how much of it was real spiritual power and how much was just psychological manipulation, but she knew that Patricia believed in it completely, believed she could control people and situations through these practices, believed she had the right to interfere in her children's lives in whatever way she saw fit to keep them close and dependent on her. Hearing this confirmation from someone who had been on the inside of Patricia's world, who had witnessed things I had never seen, was both vindicating and devastating. I had been right all along about what was happening to me, but being right didn't change the fact that I had lost my marriage, lost my community, lost years of my life to someone's twisted need for control. I sat there in that coffee shop listening to Vanessa's confession and apology, and I felt a complicated mixture of emotions. Part of me wanted to rage at her, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain I had endured because of her complicity. Part of me wanted to reject her apology entirely, to tell her that sorry wasn't enough to repair the damage that had been done. But another part of me, the part that had been learning about forgiveness and healing and letting go of bitterness, recognized that Vanessa was also a victim of Patricia's manipulation in her own way, that she had been raised in a toxic system that had warped her perceptions and her loyalties. When Vanessa finally stopped talking and looked at me with pleading eyes, clearly desperate for some kind of absolution or forgiveness, I took a deep breath and chose my words carefully. I told her that I appreciated her courage in coming forward and telling me the truth, that I understood how difficult it must have been to recognize and admit her mother's behavior and her own role in what had happened to me. I told her that her apology mattered, that it helped to know I hadn't been crazy or paranoid, that there really had been deliberate forces working against me. But I also told her that forgiveness was a process, not a single moment, and that while I didn't harbor hatred or wishes for revenge against her, I also wasn't ready to pretend that everything was fine or to restore any kind of relationship between us. Too much damage had been done, too much trust had been broken, and I needed to protect my own healing and well-being rather than trying to rebuild bridges that might never be stable again. Vanessa nodded, accepting my response with more grace than I had expected. And then she asked me about Michael, asked if I had heard from him at all since the divorce, asked if I knew how he was doing. I told her honestly that I hadn't had any contact with Michael in months, that the last time we had spoken was that phone call where he had repeated his mother's accusations about my faithfulness. Vanessa's face fell and she told me something that broke my heart, even though I thought I had already processed all the grief I could possibly feel about my failed marriage. She told me that Michael was struggling, that he had become withdrawn and depressed, that he had started drinking more than he should and had stopped going to church entirely. She said that he had mentioned my name a few times in conversations with her, had expressed regret and confusion about how everything had fallen apart, had wondered aloud if he had made a terrible mistake in not believing me. But according to Vanessa, Patricia still had her hooks in him deep, still controlled much of his life and his thinking, and he didn't seem capable of breaking free from her influence even when it was clearly destroying him. Hearing that Michael was suffering gave me no satisfaction or sense of justice. It just made me sad. Sad for both of us, sad for what we could have been if his mother hadn't poisoned everything. Sad for the loss of potential and promise that our marriage had represented. But I also knew that Michael's suffering was not my responsibility to fix, that I couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved, or who wasn't willing to do the hard work of setting boundaries and choosing health over dysfunction. He had made his choices, had prioritized his mother's approval over his wife's well-being, and now he had to live with the consequences of those choices just as I had to live with the consequences of trusting him to protect our marriage. Before we parted ways that afternoon, Vanessa asked if there was anything she could do to make amends, any way she could help repair some of the damage that had been done. I thought about it for a moment, then told her that the best thing she could do was to protect her own children from Patricia's manipulation, to recognize the patterns and break the cycle so that the next generation didn't grow up with the same warped understanding of love and family and boundaries that had characterized their family system for so long. I told her that healing generational trauma and dysfunction was hard work, but important work, and that if she really wanted to make a difference, that's where she should focus her energy. Vanessa promised she would try, and we said goodbye outside that coffee shop. Two women who would probably never be close, but who had at least achieved a measure of honesty and understanding that hadn't existed before. As I drove back to Virginia that evening, I felt lighter somehow, like the validation of Vanessa's confession had allowed me to finally release the last lingering doubts about my own perception of reality. I had been right all along, and knowing that definitively helped me let go of the what-ifs and the maybe I should-haves that had occasionally haunted my quieter moments.
The following months brought continued healing and growth as I settled more fully into my new life. I made friends with other teachers at my school, joined a book club at the local library, started attending a pottery class on Thursday evenings just because it sounded interesting and I wanted to try something new. I dated casually a few times, nothing serious, just testing the waters of what it felt like to be pursued and appreciated by men who didn't come with complicated family dynamics or hidden agendas. Some of these dates were pleasant, some were awkward, but all of them reminded me that there was life after divorce, that I was still young and had so much living left to do, that my story didn't end with the failure of my first marriage. I also continued my therapy sessions with Dr. Chen, though less frequently now, moving from weekly appointments to bi-weekly and then monthly check-ins as I developed stronger coping skills and more consistent emotional stability. In one of our sessions during the spring, almost a year and a half after I had left North Carolina, Dr. Chin asked me how I would describe myself now compared to who I was at the beginning of our work together. I thought about the question carefully before answering, wanting to be honest and accurate about the transformation I had undergone. I told her that I felt like I had been dismantled completely and then reassembled with a stronger foundation and clearer boundaries. I told her that I no longer defined myself primarily through my relationships with other people, that I had learned to find value and purpose within myself rather than seeking external validation. I told her that I was less naive now about the ways people could use religion and family ties to manipulate and control, but that I hadn't become cynical or bitter. Instead, I had become more discerning, more careful about who I trusted and how much of myself I gave away, more willing to walk away from situations that didn't honor my worth. Dr. Chin smiled at my answer and told me something that I would carry with me forever. She said that trauma could either break us or break us open, and that I had chosen the latter path, had allowed my painful experiences to crack open my previously limited understanding of myself and the world, and had used that opening to grow into a fuller, truer version of who I was meant to be. She said that many people who go through what I had experienced become trapped in victim identity or consumed by bitterness and desire for revenge, but that I had done the hard work of processing my pain without allowing it to define me, of acknowledging what had been done to me without giving those who hurt me continued power over my present and future. Her words helped me understand that healing wasn't about returning to who I was before the trauma, because that version of myself was gone forever, changed by experiences that couldn't be undone. Instead, healing was about integrating those experiences into a new sense of self that was both wounded and whole, both scarred and strong, both cautious and capable of trust. It was about building a life that honored both the pain I had endured and the resilience I had discovered, that made space for both grief over what was lost and gratitude for what remained. As another school year came to a close and summer arrived with its promise of rest and renewal, I took a trip by myself to the North Carolina mountains, to an area Michael and I had talked about visiting but never had. Part of me wondered if going there would be painful, if it would dredge up memories and regrets I had worked so hard to process and release. But instead, I found that I could appreciate the beauty of the landscape without associating it with him, could hike through forests and sit beside mountain streams and watch sunsets from rocky overlooks while feeling completely present in my own experience rather than haunted by ghosts of what might have been. On the last evening of that trip, I sat on the porch of the small cabin I had rented and wrote a letter that I never intended to send. It was addressed to Michael, and in it I said all the things I had never gotten to say during our marriage or our divorce, all the hurt and anger and disappointment I had swallowed down in my attempts to keep the peace. I wrote about how deeply his betrayal had wounded me, how abandoned I had felt when he chose his mother's lies over my truth, how much I loved him, and how thoroughly that love had been disrespected and discarded.
But I also wrote about what I had learned from our marriage and its dissolution, about the strength I had discovered when I was forced to stand alone, about the clarity that had come from being pushed to my absolute limits and finding that I could survive even when I thought I couldn't. I wrote about forgiveness, not the kind of forgiveness that excuses or minimizes what was done, but the kind that releases the person who forgives from the burden of carrying anger and resentment indefinitely. I wrote that I forgave him for not being strong enough to break free from his mother's control, for not having the tools or understanding to recognize what was happening until it was too late, for being a flawed human being who made choices that hurt me even if he didn't fully comprehend the extent of that hurt. And I wrote that I forgave myself for staying as long as I did, for doubting my own perceptions, for believing that love and patience and trying harder would be enough to fix something that was broken at a level I couldn't reach. When I finished the letter, I read it through once, allowing myself to feel all the emotions it contained, and then I burned it in the small fire pit outside my cabin, watching as the pages curled and blackened and turned to ash that drifted up into the mountain air and disappeared. It felt like a ritual of release, a way of acknowledging everything I had been through while simultaneously letting it go, of honoring my journey while choosing not to be defined by it. The flames consumed my words and carried them away, and I felt something settle deep in my soul, a sense of completion and peace that I hadn't known I was still searching for. When I returned home from that trip, I found a message on my phone from an old friend from college, Jessica, whom I hadn't spoken to in several years. She had heard through mutual connections about my divorce and wanted to reach out, to reconnect, to see how I was doing. We met for dinner the following week, and as we caught up on each other's lives, I found myself telling her an abbreviated version of my story, the major points without all the painful details. Jessica listened with compassion and understanding, and when I finished, she said something that surprised me. She told me that she had always admired my strength, even back in college, my quiet determination and resilience, and that she wasn't at all surprised to hear that I had survived such a difficult experience and come out the other side still standing. She said that she had gone through her own painful divorce a few years earlier, though for different reasons than mine, and that she understood how isolating and identity-shattering that process could be. We talked for hours that night, sharing our experiences and insights, laughing about the ridiculous advice people give to divorced women, crying a little over the dreams we had lost and the futures we had to rebuild from scratch. By the end of the evening, I felt like I had reclaimed a piece of my past that I thought was gone forever, had reconnected with someone who knew me before I became defined by my marriage and its failure. Jessica and I began meeting regularly after that, and she introduced me to other women she knew who had gone through divorces or difficult breakups, and slowly I found myself part of a community of survivors who understood each other's journeys in ways that people who hadn't experienced similar losses simply couldn't. These women became my sisters in healing, my reminder that I wasn't alone in my struggles, my proof that it was possible to rebuild and thrive after everything fell apart. As I approached the 2-year anniversary of leaving my marriage, I took stock of where I was and marveled at the distance I had traveled. I had a job I loved, working with children who filled my days with purpose and joy. I had an apartment that felt like a true home, decorated with things I chose simply because I liked them. I had friendships that nourished my soul and supported my growth. I had hobbies and interests that had nothing to do with anyone else's preferences or expectations. I had a relationship with God that felt authentic and personal, rather than performative or filtered through other people's interpretations. I had my health, my strength, my clarity of mind and purpose, and most importantly, I had myself, whole and healed enough to move forward with confidence and hope.
There were still hard days, still moments when I wondered what my life might have looked like if Michael had chosen differently, if Patricia had been a different kind of mother-in-law, if I had recognized the warning signs earlier and protected myself sooner. But those moments became less frequent and less powerful over time, replaced by gratitude for the life I was building and excitement about the future that stretched out before me, full of possibility and promise. I also came to understand something profound about the nature of truth and validation. For so long, I had desperately wanted Michael and his family and our church community to acknowledge what had really happened, to admit that Patricia had been manipulative and cruel, to vindicate me in the eyes of everyone who had judged me. But I eventually realized that their acknowledgement or lack thereof didn't change the fundamental truth of my experience, didn't determine my worth or my reality, didn't have any power over me unless I gave it that power. My truth was my truth, regardless of whether anyone else believed it or affirmed it, And learning to stand confidently in that truth without needing external validation was perhaps the most important lesson I learned from the entire ordeal. One Sunday morning in early autumn, almost exactly 2 years after I had left North Carolina, I was sitting in church during worship when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find an elderly woman named Margaret, someone I had seen at services but hadn't really gotten to know, smiling at me warmly. After the service ended, she approached me again and asked if I would be willing to share my testimony with the women's ministry group, said that she had heard bits and pieces of my story and believed it would encourage other women who are going through difficult seasons in their marriages or family relationships. At first, I was hesitant, worried about being vulnerable in front of a group, worried about judgment or misunderstanding or people thinking I was bitter or unforgiving. But something in Margaret's kind eyes made me agree, made me think that perhaps sharing my story could help someone else feel less alone in their struggles, could give someone else permission to trust their own perceptions and set healthy boundaries, even when it was difficult and unpopular. The following month, I stood in front of about 30 women at the church and told them my story. I told them about falling in love and getting married, about the slow erosion of trust and safety in my relationship, about being gaslit and manipulated and isolated. I told them about the spiritual warfare aspects of my experience, about discovering that not everyone who claimed to be a Christian actually followed Christ's teachings of love and respect and honesty. I told them about the painful process of accepting that my marriage was over, about the grief and shame and fear I had worked through in the months and years that followed. And I told them about the healing I had found, about learning to trust myself again, about discovering strength I didn't know I possessed, about rebuilding a life that honored my worth and reflected my values. When I finished speaking, there was a long moment of silence, and I worried that I had said too much, that I had been too honest, that these women would judge me harshly for getting divorced or for speaking negatively about my former in-laws. But then one woman started clapping and others joined in, and soon the whole room was applauding, and several women were crying, and I realized that my story had touched something deep in many of them, had given voice to experiences they had lived through but never felt they could talk about openly. After the meeting ended, women lined up to talk to me, to share their own stories of difficult in-law relationships or marriages that had ended, or times when they had been made to feel crazy for trusting their own intuition. Some thanked me for my courage in speaking out, said that they had felt alone in their struggles until hearing that someone else understood. Others asked for advice about how to set boundaries or recognize manipulation, or decide when to stay and fight versus when to walk away. I couldn't give them easy answers because there weren't any, but I could offer them the gift of being heard and believed, the same gift I had desperately needed during my darkest days. That evening, as I drove home, feeling emotionally exhausted but also strangely uplifted, I realized that my painful experience had been transformed into something meaningful, that the suffering I had endured could now serve a purpose by helping others navigate similar challenges. I thought about the verse from Romans that talks about how suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And I understood in a new way what that meant. My suffering hadn't been pointless or wasted. It had been the furnace in which my character was refined, the crucible in which my hope was forged, the darkness that it taught me to recognize and appreciate light. And now, standing on the other side of that suffering, with scars that had healed into badges of survival, I could reach back and help pull others through their own dark valleys, could shine a light on paths I had already traveled and warn of dangers I had already encountered. As winter approached and I prepared for another holiday season, the third one since my marriage had ended, I felt deeply grateful for the journey I had been on, painful as it had been. I was grateful for parents who had taken me in and supported me unconditionally when I had nowhere else to go.
I was grateful for Dr. Chen, who had helped me understand what had happened to me and given me tools to heal.
I was grateful for friends like Jessica and Ruth who had walked alongside me during the hardest parts of recovery. I was grateful for my students who had given me purpose and reminded me of innocence and hope. I was grateful for Vanessa's courage in coming forward with the truth, even though it came too late to save my marriage. And in a strange way, I was even grateful for the experience itself, because it had shown me who I really was beneath all the conditioning and people-pleasing and desperate need for approval. It had stripped away everything I thought defined me and forced me to discover what remained when all of that was gone. And what remained was stronger and truer and more resilient than I ever could have imagined. I never heard from Michael again after that phone call months earlier, and I was at peace with that. He remained a chapter in my story, an important one that had shaped me in significant ways, but he was no longer a part of my present or my future. I hoped he eventually found the courage to break free from his mother's control, hoped he found his own path to healing and wholeness, hoped he learned the lessons that our failed marriage should have taught him. But his journey was his own to walk, and I had released any sense of responsibility for his choices or his happiness. My job now was to continue building the life I had envisioned in Dr. Chen's office that day, the life where I was free and whole and surrounded by people who valued me for who I truly was. And as I looked around at what I had created in the 2 years since leaving North Carolina, I could see that I was well on my way to making that vision a reality. My story didn't have a fairy tale ending with a new romance or a dramatic reconciliation or revenge against those who had hurt me. Instead, it had something better and more lasting. It had a genuine ending where I had reclaimed myself, where I had learned to stand in my truth regardless of who believed me, where I had discovered that the most important relationship I would ever have was the one with myself. It had an ending where I could look in the mirror and be proud of the woman looking back, proud of her strength and her grace and her refusal to be destroyed by those who had tried to break her. And it had an ending that was really a beginning, a launching point into a future full of possibilities I was only just starting to explore. On Christmas Eve that year, I sat with my parents in their living room, watching the lights twinkle on the tree and sipping hot chocolate like I had done countless times throughout my childhood. My mother looked over at me and asked if I was happy, really, truly happy. And I thought about the question carefully before answering. I told her that I was, that happiness looked different than I had once imagined it would, that it was quieter and more internal and less dependent on external circumstances than I had expected. I told her that I had learned to find joy in small things, to appreciate the present moment rather than constantly chasing some imagined perfect future, to define success on my own terms rather than by society's standards or other people's expectations. I told her that I was proud of myself for surviving what I had survived, for having the courage to walk away when staying would have destroyed me, for doing the hard work of healing rather than numbing my pain or projecting it onto others. And I told her that while I still hope to find love again someday, to maybe build a family and share my life with a partner who truly saw and valued me, I was no longer afraid of being alone because I had discovered that I was actually pretty good company for myself. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and she reached over and squeezed my hand. She told me that watching me go through everything I had endured had been one of the hardest experiences of her life as a parent, that she had felt helpless and angry and desperate to fix things for me. But she also said that watching me heal and grow and reclaim myself had been one of her proudest moments as a mother, that she could see the woman I had become was so much stronger and wiser than the woman who had driven into their driveway 2 years earlier, broken and defeated. She said that if she could go back and prevent all the pain I had experienced, she probably would, but that she also recognized that pain had forged me into someone extraordinary, someone who would now be able to help countless others because I had walked through the fire and emerged on the other side still standing. As I sat there with my parents that Christmas Eve, surrounded by warmth and love and acceptance, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. My journey through betrayal and manipulation and the dissolution of my marriage had been the hardest thing I had ever experienced. But it had also been the making of me. It had taught me about the complexity of human relationships, about the darkness that could exist even in people who claim to follow the light, about the importance of trusting myself and setting boundaries, and choosing my own well-being over keeping the peace. It had taught me that not all marriages were meant to last forever, that sometimes the most faithful thing you could do was recognize when something was broken beyond repair and have the courage to walk away. It had taught me that healing was possible even when damage seemed permanent, that new beginnings could emerge from devastating endings, that the human spirit was far more resilient than I had ever imagined. And perhaps most importantly, it had taught me that my worth was not determined by whether my husband believed me, or whether his family accepted me, or whether my church community supported me. My worth was inherent, unchangeable, given to me by God before any person ever had the chance to affirm or deny it. And no amount of lies or manipulation or rejection could take that away from me unless I allowed it to. As I looked ahead to the new year and all the possibilities it held, I felt ready to continue writing my story, not as someone defined by what had been done to her, but as someone empowered by how she had responded, how she had survived, how she had chosen healing over bitterness and growth over stagnation. My husband had believed their lies over me, had chosen his mother's poison over his wife's truth, and that betrayal had nearly destroyed me. But nearly wasn't the same as actually, and I had emerged from that dark valley with my spirit intact and my future bright with promise. And that, I realized, was my victory, my vindication, my testimony to anyone who would listen, that even when the people who should protect you fail to do so, even when the systems that should support you turn against you, even when you feel most alone and most doubted, you can still survive and thrive and build a beautiful life from the ashes of what was lost. The lies hadn't won. The manipulation hadn't succeeded in breaking me permanently. And I was living proof that truth, even when it takes time to be acknowledged, even when it's never validated by those who should have believed it, still has power, still has value, still sets you free.
Thank you for listening to my story today. If it touched your heart or made you think about the courage it takes to stand for truth, I'd be grateful if you'd share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos. I will be there in next video. Goodbye.